So just finished 12th week. I know it's been an exciting week. I can't wait to see what you all want to talk about. I want to mention just a couple bills that our Senate Dems have been carrying that really are solving good problems, real problems that need to be solved. So Mark Mann has a House Bill 1601, which is a bipartisan measure allowing teachers to use up to 6 weeks of their accrued leave to extend their state benefit. We're so thrilled that we got paid maternity leave for educators. I'm so glad that's been implemented. But we want to make sure that those educators are able to use their sick leave if they have it to continue that leave, giving them up to 12 weeks. We know that's what's best for moms and for babies. And I want to mention my bill with Representative Annie Mintz that puts a 30-day response timeline for open records requests. We just want to make sure that we're doing what we can to try to begin to put some timelines in place. That did pass the House unanimously, passed the Judiciary Committee unanimously. We'll see if I can get it heard on the floor. So what do you all want to talk about?
Well, I guess you just walked out of a budget conversation, so I'll go ahead and start there. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is just Democrat participation in that process and those conversations to the degree they're being had, and kind of, you've talked about it before, but what your thoughts are on how it looks this year and whether you're satisfied.
Sure. So the budget, the transformation that happened last year has continued, and I think Chairman Hall is working very hard to think through how to have us meaningfully brought up to speed, and so we are at the table on some things. So certainly subcommittee work, our members definitely rolled their sleeves up, did the work, talked to agencies, reviewed budgets, made recommendations, were part of meetings, and we're part of those recommendations. Now, did it reflect all our priorities? Of course not. I doubt any do, but I do feel like there was meaningful involvement by our members in those subcommittees. At this point, Hall was bringing us up to speed with the same information he gave the Republican caucus, and we really appreciate him thinking of that. He's giving us a lay of the land, understanding the context of our current financial picture, helping us see the overview of what the House has put on their transparency portal, which I'm glad he did, because I've looked at it, but it takes a lot of time to kind of really dig into it. And so I feel like in this process, I feel like we're pretty well informed. I think there's huge things moving that we will not be at the table on that final decision around what are we going to do about working families' taxes? What are we going to do about some of these big asks that have come in for needs? Those things, we know we won't be in that final table, but we know that we need to listen to the people on those. Yeah. What else?
Just really quick follow-up. I guess speaking of the proverbial table that we're all sitting around, right? Last year there was a physical table and there was no Democrats around it, and so I guess in comparing the two processes over the course of the 2 years, do you feel like you're at that proverbial table, whether it's not a physical one or not?
I mean, this is like, are we at Thanksgiving dinner? Or are we at the kids' table, maybe? I don't know. I mean, the process is, it is set up around the majority party leads that process, and the leadership at the table are going to be those folks. And so I think we won't see that same kind of, I believe Chairman Hall's already said that. We're not going to have, we don't want it to be a circus. We want to have meaningful conversation in public, but not every tit for tat is going to be in public. We're not in those closed-door sessions. We're not. But are we advocating for priorities? Absolutely. Are we trying to bring the voices of our constituents there and what we consider unmet needs and the needs of the people? Absolutely we are. Because we need to make sure that really our decisions are not being made by focus on politics. Yeah.
What's your reaction today to the Senate Rules Committee on Senate Bill or House Bill 2144?
Yeah, I have not gotten in depth with the actual content yet, except for the overview. And I know I'm fascinated that this got bypassed its original committee assignment and got plugged in. And so it's going to continue to be controversial, I believe. I was surprised the vote came so overwhelmingly for that bill. Is there something specific you wanted to get to?
It was supposed to die in judiciary.
Yeah.
Got yanked and put the pro tem said it was part of a package of bills the House really wanted. Was just wondering.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing you see when politics are just making decisions. So if we were trying to make the House happy with that, they were probably disappointed it didn't get heard, and so they threw it into rules. The part that's too bad about that is that those bills were subbed in at the last minute. There really wasn't a thorough vetting of those, and so I think it's not the ideal review process. But I think that's what we've seen when they're making decisions for political decisions. Yeah.
Okay. Senate appropriations approved what, 1/20th in a path yesterday?
Right.
You had voted for that bill in its original form in revenue and tax and switched your vote yesterday. Why did you do that?
Several big things. One is it included the trigger for the path to zero. We have not supported the path to zero. We've yet to see plans that show that that's going to benefit Oklahomans and that that's not just a giveaway to wealthy people. So it did include the path, which I want to point out that it included fixes to the bill that we just passed last week that had a lot of ambiguities and was not well thought through. And so it was an update to that. Show me how we're going to make our government work with those reductions in revenues. I'll be glad to look at it. We just need to be real about what's being cut or what does it mean to limit growth if you're talking about a growing population, increased costs. We have to be real about what's going to be cut if that's so. And then the other big concern is we can say everyone benefits, but we know who benefits the most when income taxes are cut. It is the wealthiest individuals. So we have to look at the balance there of the benefit to middle class families, to lower income families, compared to the benefit of the public safety, schools, and the other things that we benefit from our tax revenues. So to me, in those balance, it pretty much is clearly on the side of not a good idea.
Is there any effort to look into the finances of the Department of Education with some of the stuff coming out about these large bonuses going to folks that live out of state? Do you think there should be?
Yeah, I mean, deeply disturbing to see some of the decisions that are being made by the superintendent around payment. You know, this harkens back to our concerns as we got rid of merit protection and some of the other things that kept a more systematic schedule for salaries across government, and that allowed us to have some fairness and parity, because what we see is complete unfairness, and it may not be against the law. It's just a bad idea, right? And that latitude is there, and there's a lot of discussion about where those revenues are coming from and if they're just from these empty full-time positions that we funded. So I think what we're concerned about is we have yet to see any real pushback against those numbers. How do we move forward? Because we don't want to cut budgets to schools, but at the same time, we don't want to give him additional discretion. So I would say that's an area where I think we've offered a couple of suggestions, but we're not really in that conversation on how it's going to move forward. I think we have to be especially careful. I think the more money that goes into the formula, the better, because then our local districts can work that out.
You think the Senate will actually move your resolution to send back the social studies?
I do not think the Senate will hear my resolution to reject the social studies standards. I hope we see a resolution to reject the social studies standards. I'm not giving up hope on that, because we still have until Tuesday to have that heard. We don't want our children taught this. I've talked to lots of parents across the state who agree, educators who agree, and so I think I see a groundswell of concern, and I think the deadline is really driving my colleagues getting more informed about our role, and that we get that responsibility, that we are allowed to veto it if it's not appropriate for kids. And so I had conversations that I do think our Republican caucus is taking more seriously, and I hope that means that they're really considering it.
I wonder, on that note, in your mind, what the problem has been centrally around the rules and the standards around education. Has it been the process or the contents, or both?
You mean the problem with how the superintendents run it, or the problem with how we're handling it?
With how it's being handled, I think.
Okay. We do have confusion around the rules around the standards. We're still clarifying. I think because that only happens with one set of standards per year, and rarely have we felt the need to reject them. There's a lot of confusion about the governor's role in it, et cetera. With admin rules, I think the level of using the rules to attack students and to attack political issues is so heightened. You know, even when you had many educators who were concerned about how Superintendent Barisi was running things, I don't think you saw that level of direct attack to the functioning of education, to the like the naturalization test for educators, asking educators who are already certified and in our classrooms to go back and take a test. That is a choice you're making that's undermining teachers. And that level of, it's an attack on our educators. it hasn't happened. So I think that's one of the reasons the rules are so problematic, because a lot of times our review of the rules is kind of routine, like, oh, of course they still have to have a process for fees or licensure or whatever. Very rarely is it this politicized. Yeah.
The House has a select committee going on about mental health. You stepped into it for a little bit last week, last week. Have you been able to talk with the House Democrat caucus about what happened in the committee, what they got from it, or were you're still able to watch it with other senators?
Yeah, I mean, the House Select Committee meeting again shortly. I hope there's a chair for me. They were very packed. I mean, they had speakers and a lot of members participating, so I did watch that remotely. I think the challenge is having the information spoken aloud, and how are we going to match that up with what we're hearing from the contracted groups that have seen cuts. I think today having the chief financial officer there is really important, because that's when we can start to match some of those things up. The problem is currently services are being cut off. And so I'm alarmed and disturbed at the pace that we're tackling this. And I commend the House for taking action. I just want to see us take more and quicker, because I think what we're seeing is things are closing. Last week I may have mentioned that the Seminole Drug Court closed. I'm starting to hear of services closing in different counties because of the cuts right now. And so if we don't see a change of policy very, very soon, I think we're going to see a big layoff across the state, and we're going to see a lot more emergencies, which means people going to ERs, which is going to cost Medicaid more. 1/4 of Oklahomans are on Medicaid. So if we don't handle this now, it's going to cost the state more, and people are going to suffer. So I've been gathering as much information as I can. I know that those people serving those communities, whether it's law enforcement or the actual therapists, have been trying to communicate what they need to. So I hope we can get to the bottom of it. Really, the governor asked for this responsibility when we got rid of the boards for the agencies in 2019. Governor Stitt said, the buck stops with me. Okay, well, what's going to happen next?
One of the points inside that the commissioner brought up was that when it came to the contracts and cancellation, is that there was maybe some miscommunication, bad communication between OMES and the Department of Mental Health. Did you see that part, and what did you think?
I watched it. I mean, I think often that agency is a convenient scapegoat. OMES gets put in the middle of a lot of processes where I just don't think it's fair to blame them. I mean, show me the data that they actually are responsible for that. Because what I've seen is those original letters that went out were sent by the agency and did not have a good transition plan, and included retroactive cuts. So you're going to tell a group that's been providing services to people who need immediate emergency treatment for substance use disorder that you're not going to pay them for past work they did on contract. Those letters went out from the agency. So we need to see clear responsibility taken for that and remedial what's the next action to fix that? Are we saying, yes, you are cut for the rest of the year? That's what I've heard so far. I haven't seen a fix there. But now I'm hearing there's new budget requests possibly coming in. So I'm hearing that the agency is admitting there's a larger gap than they've asked for. So I don't know how we get to a final answer, but we got to take some steps in between.
Going back to the standards for a minute, and not necessarily these specific ones, but one of the problems seems to be that the statute says the legislature may approve, disapprove, or recommend changes. Mm-hmm. Should the legislature be required to do that on every set of standards?
That's a great question. I'm torn on it because I've seen our reaction to administrative rules, and they're wanting to switch administrative rules to require us to take action. I'm very concerned. We have a high workload here. We create a lot of work for ourselves too, because we also deal with a lot of issues that are not real problem solving. So we end up with, you file 3,000 bills and you're running things through to committee. We don't have time to be thorough reading those standards. And so I have concerns about our ability to do that job. We are not the executive branch. And so I think the intervening when appropriate seems like the best move. But then I also am now seeing the inaction. So I guess I'm half and half right now. I certainly don't want the rules flipped. That's too much to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Another education question.
Yeah.
So I was a teacher during the teacher walkout. I was up here at the Capitol, and the energy I feel in the air from people who are still in education, similar angst, similar discomfort. What do you say to teachers who could fill that same sort of
Yeah.
revolt.
I'm hearing from a lot of educators that are at the end of their rope, and people who've stuck it out in the classroom in hopes that we've turned a corner. They went through budget cuts, they went through the walkout, they went through COVID. I hear a lot of exhaustion and fatigue, and the only people I hear that are not that exhausted and fatigued or don't watch anything to do with state or federal government. So I just am grateful to educators who stuck it out. I hope they will stay with us and that we can really do the right thing for them in terms of class sizes and support. But I can see why they're demoralized. Watching the voucher fight in Texas has made it clear to me how demoralized our educators are. Texas has been flooded with people from across the state fighting against private school vouchers. By the time that came to our Oklahoma floor, the educators were already exhausted, parents were exhausted, and we didn't have the advocacy base that they've got going there. And it's made it more clear to me how burned out people were by the time that came. And I think that's because of years of underfunding and years of overtaxing people in terms of special education needs, mandates, professional development mandates. And I'm afraid we're at a real challenging point with our teacher workforce.
But what do you say to them who work in public school because they specifically don't want to teach religious curriculum,
Oh, yeah.
survival curriculum, but now they're being saddled up with?
I ask them to call. They need to call their rep or their senator. I mean, I've heard some offices are receiving quite a few calls or emails. I'm not as many as need to happen for the change, because we would need a majority of the Senate and House plus the leadership of Senate and House to bring that up and to pass that out in a timely fashion. That takes a flood of phone calls or emails, and educators and parents calling. It can't just be a few teachers. It can't just be the historians. It has to be more. And I've seen some parents expressing alarm, and I was like, the time is now. This is the weekend. Do it, Yeah. All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.